Hey everyone, welcome back to First-Hand Globetrotting. It's been a few months since I've gone anywhere, so today I'm back with part 2 of a throwback vlog about my trip to Melbourne, Australia in 2017. Australia is a country I'd been wanting to go to for so many years, so I was incredibly excited for this trip. In case you missed the first part, I fought off jet lag by wandering the streets of Melbourne and getting a sense of what there was to see, and then I took an absolutely incredible day trip out to the Great Ocean Road to see the incredible coastline, have my first kangaroo and koala sightings, take a hike in a rainforest, see an endless parade of coastal rock formations, and so much more. In case you missed it, there's a link in the video description. Today's day 3, and I'm ready to spend more time exploring the city. If you remember my reaction during the walking tour I took on the first day, I was such a huge fan of all the little alleyways that are cutting through Melbourne. It seemed like nearly every street in the central business district had a pedestrian laneway or arcade you can go through. Some of them were just your standard alleys between buildings, but I kept seeing really cool and interesting ones all over. So today, I wanted to get out and explore some of them and see what I could find. Right across from the main train station and nearly right next to my hotel was Degraves Street, so that's where I started. On first glance, it seems like it's just a hip little pedestrian street lined with a bunch of different shops and places to eat. But I really liked how it kept a little bit of that grimier alleyway feeling with some street art and graffiti splashed across the walls as you're walking around. Then towards the end, it turned into mostly a really long cafe or restaurant area with the entire middle part filled with outdoor seating. It seemed like a really popular route for people trying to get around the central business district without having to take the main roads, and there was always a steady parade of people. Degraves was only a block long, so once I got to the end I was back at a regular road. But right across the street was Centre Place, so I hopped in there. I think I liked this one even better than Degraves. I'm not exactly sure what it was, but it felt less polished and less planned, like it wasn't trying to be too fancy. I know it sounds weird saying that one alleyway is fancier than another, but that's just the impression that I got. It probably had something to do with how narrow the laneway seemed, with the walls feeling like they were leaning inward. I really liked the atmosphere that created. Nearly the entire place was filled with little restaurant stalls, and since they were packed in so tightly you had lots of choices. Most of them had little takeout counters up front, perfect for grabbing something on the go. About halfway down, after you pass a graffiti-covered side alley, the open-air laneway ends as you go up a couple of stairs and end up in a covered area. This part lost all of the charm that the first part had. It reminded me more of a generic mall hallway, filled with less restaurants and more stores. I didn't spend very long down there, and mostly just walked through it until I came out at the other end where I ran into the next road. Looking at the sign, it seems like maybe the covered area is called Centre Way. So Centre Place was pretty great, but Centre Way was mostly unremarkable. On my walking tour, we went to one laneway that had pretty much every inch of it covered with street art, Hosier Lane. Anytime I'm walking through a city, I can't help but look at the nice pieces of urban art that turn otherwise dull walls into something colorful and vibrant. So of course, I wanted to come back and check this spot out. From what I was able to find, it seems like Hosier Lane is pretty much a free-for-all for artists. As I looked around, there were just so many different pieces everywhere. It kind of surprised me how well it all fit together. All of these different paintings kind of flowing into each other, with the newer ones partially covering the older stuff, like a big graffiti mosaic. And it's a type of place that's constantly changing as new artists come and paint over whatever was there before. I bet if you went there today, the walls would look nothing like they did when I was there. There are some parts that just look like pretty standard alleyway graffiti, so I walked past those pretty quickly, but then I'd look up and see a beautiful, massive mural looking down at me. I found that a lot of the nicer pieces seem to be the ones that were higher up. Maybe those spots are harder to get to, so they don't get painted over as much. Or maybe there's some unwritten rule that unless you're going to make something really impressive, you should just stay at ground level. There was even a little offshoot alleyway, and it's just as covered with paint as the main part. As you can probably see, every square inch of wall space is up for grabs here. Not just the walls, even the garbage cans and air conditioners and grates and everything else are painted. It's all fair game. These bricks must have so many layers of paint on them by this point. This alley is super popular with people looking for a good photo op. I can't blame them, just look at me. I saw it and immediately wanted to come back and take some more pictures and videos. It wasn't all just about making beautiful art though. There were actually a lot of pieces that were memorials for people, or promoting some sort of social movement, or otherwise trying to highlight a message or idea. So much to see, so much color, so many great pieces of street art. I had such a fun time wandering down Hosier Lane and having a look around. Next up was a laneway named after a super famous Australian band, ACDC Lane. The best way I can describe this one is street art mixed with rock and roll. You can probably guess how popular this one is. There was even a tour group there when I showed up. Most of the walls look like some school kids went wild on them. I really liked how it was one big mural filled with all sorts of little doodles and sketches. It was cool how the background went from white to black the closer you got to the rock club at the end, and the sketches seemed to get a little bit more adult. That club, Cherry Bar, is one of the biggest draws down here, and it's pretty fitting, isn't it? You couldn't have an alley named after ACDC without putting a live music venue at the end. But make sure you don't turn around and go home once you hit the bar. ACDC Lane runs into another alleyway, and that one has some amazing murals to see. The mural running down ACDC definitely had a simpler style, but the size and detail and quality of these ones blew me away. It's wild to think how much time and skill went into these, and if you didn't wander down into alleys, you'd never know they were there. And if you have a long night at Cherry Bar and forget where you are, there's a nice big mural to remind you that you're in Melbourne. Like I said with Hosier Lane, I love seeing huge pieces of street art, and there's so much great stuff to see here. I have zero artistic skill, so I'd have enough trouble trying to paint the children's drawings on ACDC Lane, let alone these beautiful multi-story pieces on the sides of buildings. Must have taken so much talent, and it's so great they're here. I kept retracing my steps from my day one walking tour by heading back to Chinatown. I'll be the first to admit that I'm in no way an expert on Chinese food or history or culture, so when I wander around a city's Chinatown, it's more about the look and atmosphere. So as a complete tourist, this one really caught my eye with a bunch of beautiful arches along the road and strings of lanterns running along the entire street. And of course, it's completely packed with restaurants, so if you're looking for something to eat, there'll be never-ending options for you. Most of Chinatown is one long road, Little Bourke Street, but just like the rest of the city, it has a bunch of its own little side alleyways with things hiding away down there. If you're looking for the arches to take pictures, you won't have much trouble finding them since they were at pretty much every intersection along the road. They really did a good job showing off the neighborhood. I had absolutely no plan, I was just wandering around, taking it all in, and poking my head into anywhere that looked interesting. And of course, I picked a restaurant that looked popular and popped in to grab some really great Chinese food. For dinner tonight, I went full-on tourist and got myself a Kangaroo burger. I know, kind of weird since I just said how excited I was to see a wild one the other day. It was actually really tasty, and I like the slice of beet on top, which I guess is a popular burger topping here in Australia. On to day 4, and I have more of Melbourne to see. Today, I'm going to see it from up in the sky at the top of Eureka Tower. I spend so much of my trips exploring the cities at ground level, but I love getting a chance to see a panoramic view of everything from up above. It's one of the tallest buildings in Australia in the Southern Hemisphere, so I was hoping it would be a fun way to get out of the rain and see things from a different perspective. When I got off the elevator at the Skydeck, it was pretty much a ring with floor-to-ceiling windows everywhere. The views out were pretty great, you can see so much from up here. I did find the windows gave everything a weird bluish tint that felt a little bit off, but otherwise it was a nice clear view. The central business district is near the river but isn't very close to the bay, so the view from up here was the first time I got to really see how oceanfront Melbourne is. Just looking at all the high-rise buildings, you'd never realize how many cool alleyways and things to see are hidden down below. And I didn't realize how flat it was around Melbourne. No matter where you look, there aren't many hills unless you look way out in the distance. Most of my visit was indoors looking through the big windows, but there's a small open-air balcony on one of the sides. It's not a fully exposed ledge since they have a safety fence covering it, but it was still nice to get a little bit of fresh air and feel the breeze from up this high. Plus, it was great that I got my first views of the city in the real-life colors without the blue tint that the windows gave every other viewpoint. Overall, I was pretty happy I came here. The aerial view of Melbourne was way different than I pictured in my head, so it was nice to see it from that perspective. Once I got my feet back on the ground, I headed over to South Melbourne Market since I was already on that side of the river. It's a permanent covered market that has a mixture of indoor and street front stalls, so I thought it would be a pretty fun place to check out. I have to say, it was a lot bigger than I expected and seemed to have a huge variety of things for sale. For some reason, I assumed it would just be a bunch of fresh produce stands and maybe some arts and crafts, but it only took me a few minutes of wandering around to realize I was completely wrong. There were bakeries and stationery stores and clothing stores and antique stores and shoe stores and used booksellers and a bunch of stores that I can't even remember. Some parts reminded me of little alleyways made out of shipping containers with roll-up doors that could be closed at the end of the day. But there were plenty of places to buy fresh food and groceries too. One of the hallways was completely filled with counters where you could buy fresh fish and seafood and different types of meat. It would be pretty easy to do all of your grocery shopping just at this market. I didn't look too closely at the prices, but the selection definitely seemed good. And all of this stuff I've been showing you is just the maze of stalls on the inside. Outside there were a bunch more street-facing shops that lined the market's sidewalks. I made my way over to the outside area that seemed to be filled with food stalls because I had my heart set on trying a specific food for lunch. There's a food called dim sim that was invented in Melbourne. The best way I can describe it is a deep-fried dumpling, and the South Melbourne Market has a stall that specializes in them. They were actually way bigger than I expected. I thought they'd be pretty tiny, but they were actually nearly as big as an apple. Mine was filled with minced meat, cabbage, and some seasoning, and the closest comparison I can make is with an egg roll. It was really good and makes for a really nice greasy snack food. I ended up spending more time than I planned exploring the market, and I tried a local Melbourne specialty, so I'd say this was a pretty good place to visit. I spent the morning looking down at Melbourne from the top of Eureka Tower, but they had a combo ticket that lets you go up again at night. It was only a few dollars more than the normal ticket, so I said why not. I've been going to bed so early because of jet lag, so it kind of forced me to be up a little later tonight. I scanned my ticket, hopped back in the elevator, and headed up to the 88th floor to get an evening view of Melbourne. I've done these sort of day-night combos at observation decks before, and it can be pretty nice to see the city lit up after dark. But do you notice that the city lights seem kind of dull? I think the window tint that made the city look bluish during the day also really muted the lights and colors at night. Definitely not what I was hoping for from my nighttime view. And the Skydeck has some scrolling text along the floor, so it makes these really weird reflections that seem to just slide along the city while you're looking out. All of the reflections and interior lights were a huge design flaw, and I really found they took away from the whole experience. Almost like they didn't really plan to have people up here at night. But just like during the day, the open-air observation deck was the highlight of the Skydeck. The city lights out here look way more natural, so you get a more true look at Melbourne by night. Unfortunately, the fence kind of blocks your view, and you can only see one section of the city from up here. So I'd say the Eureka Skydeck at night is something you can skip. If you want to go during the day. And that's it for this video. I'm 4 days in, and I haven't regretted this trip to Melbourne at all. These past couple of days I've just been exploring the city and getting closer looks at all of the things I quickly walked by on day one. But I still have so much more planned for this trip. I still have to show you more of the alleyways I explore, the incredible nature and wild animals I see on another day trip, my experience going to watch a live Aussie Rules football match, and so much more. Check the video description for a link to that video and a link to part 1 in case you missed my first 2 days in Melbourne. If you have any questions, ask me in the comments. And while you're at it, like the video, share it with your friends, and subscribe to my channel. On Instagram, I'm Firsthand Globetrotting. On Twitter, I'm Firsthand Globe. Follow me on there. And don't forget, it's an incredible world out there, so pick up your passport and do some firsthand globetrotting of your own.